Obviously there's been some high-profile cases, both in Maine and outside of Maine, around what happens when staff use social media inappropriately, and so this is really the response to that, and being ahead of the game, trying to have some guidance for all of us adults to understand as we use social media. So this is really focused on setting appropriate boundaries for people. A little bit about the process. This conversation started with a policy committee last spring, and over the course of the spring and summer, we did some analysis of existing policies in other places. So those are the ones that we focused on. Westbrook was our original one that we got from Drummond Woodsum. Then they subsequently gave us RSU 21, and they also gave us Jackson, Michigan. And so the policy that is in front of the board incorporates bits and pieces. Actually, the Westbrook and RSU 21 is an expansion really of the Westbrook policy. And the policy incorporates a little bit of all of those. We've also had our principals, particularly middle school and high school principals, significantly involved in the drafting of this. And we also had, Sue's no longer here, but Sue Olofsson, representing PA, was reviewed the policy, gave us feedback, and that was incorporated into the final draft. Obviously, the policy committee has drafted this and reviewed it, and it was subsequently reviewed by Drummond Woodsum, actually after the last meeting of the policy committee. So you actually have in your packet a copy of the red line version that is the Drummond Woodsum revisions, which were just basically moving stuff around. There wasn't any substantive addition to it, which was the conditions that the policy committee had set. So this is a long definition, but this is in the policy defining social media. So as you can see, it's pretty expansive to include just about anything that is done on a computer for sort of broad communication. So that's the actual definition of social media. It goes on to name some of the applications and so on. And again, I just want to underscore that this is staff use of social media. This is, this is obviously linked to our acceptable use policy, which is for staff and also for students. But this is, this policy specifically trying to set boundaries around the use of social media by staff. So the features of the policy is that it outlines the procedure for securing approval of social media use. Basically what it says is that it's okay for staff in the Portland Public Schools to use social media to communicate to whether it's their class, the parents of their students, their club, their sailing team, or whatever the particular organization might be, and it just basically lays out what are the terms for doing that, including the application for being able to do that and the approval process for doing that, and then just basically stipulating that when you do that, you take on some responsibilities to keep the content at a certain level, know that it's being it's subject to review and approval by administration. So basically anything that you post is representing the school district and therefore has to adhere to a standard that the school district believes is appropriate for use of that. Originally we started there, but then as we went deeper and understood the realities of social media, we also delved into two other areas that I'm going to talk about. And one of them is recognizing that staff also have social media presences that are of a personal nature and that are outside of the control of the school district. And so to that end, the policy states clearly that when it's not approved social media, so it hasn't gone through that approval process that I just described, that at that point the staff person should not represent that they represent the Portland Public Schools. In other words, this is their own social media, their Facebook page, their Twitter account, or whatever it might be, and so in that case, they should make it clear that they're not representing Portland Public Schools in that. And it also establishes, and this is slippery slope, but it establishes that because they are an employee of the school district, that they have a higher standard of care in terms of what they post than what, somebody else might have, because they are expected to act as role models at all times, even in their personal presence. This is obviously the place where things get, thorny, and where, we understand that, those are, this is a aspirational statement, and, we will always get into thorny issues around this type of a statement. And then the last piece also came out of the conversations with staff, and that is, beyond social media, we all use our sort of instantaneous communication in ways that are, sort of new and evolving, and so we wanted to lay out, again, some boundaries around that. And so this policy recognizes that staff do communicate with students, and students do communicate with staff using, for example, text messaging. And we accept that that can happen for educational purposes. So, for example, a student may say, "Coach, what time is practice at?" Or a coach may send a kid a text saying, "Hey, we moved the practice from 5:30 to 6," or something, something along those lines. Or you missed, class today, so you text your teacher and say, "What did I miss? What do I need to bring tomorrow?" Things along those lines. So this recognizes that that's an appropriate use of text message. I think what we want to be very clear about is that staff should strive to maintain an appropriate level of professional separation from students. So I think there is language in the policy that speaks specifically to the being a role model and, not relating to students as if they are your peers. So they are in your care. Your relationship with them is because that they are in your care, and so keeping the appropriate level of separation that goes with that. And then the policy does state that staff on social media, on their personal social media, should not friend students unless they have an existing relationship with a student. So again, another slippery slope, area where, for example, somebody may, their child may be friends with another student, and so they're friends on social media because the student is friends with their, with the teacher's or the superintendent's child. So that's the exception. If you also, in addition to being a Portland Public Schools teacher, are a Boy Scout troop leader, you may have relationships with students, and we're not controlling whether you have whether you've friended somebody that you are in that type of a outside relationship with. And then it just stipulates very clearly the types of the communication that is not acceptable and that you will always get in trouble for. And so that is stated in very clear language in the policy in terms of the type of communication that is prohibited. And that's about it. The policy does stipulate that there will be annual training that we will provide, and it will, not at this point, but it will link to all of the appropriate related policies and so on.
Any questions? Ms. Thompson?
I just have a question, a couple questions actually. Has there been any kind of, I don't know if the staff or the PEA are
They've reviewed
involved with
it,
this?
and yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. And about the policing and the consequences, is there a procedure behind the policy that you've developed in regards to consequences?
We have not. I mean, we would treat them as personnel matters, and we would deal with them in the appropriate,
Okay. Okay.
appropriate way as personnel matters.
Okay.
I mean, again, the consequences will vary from, inappropriate use of social media, posting I don't know what you would post it would, but, something that you shouldn't post on social media might be different than, some of the things that you might text to somebody that are inappropriate. So that's why there isn't, a clear specification of that.
Okay.
Ms. Bondo?
Do we have any kind of policy how to manage or to control those kind of communication and messaging? How we can figure out exactly?
That's what this policy is.
Oh, okay.
It attempts to do that. It doesn't, it allows texting to occur.
Yeah, what I really want to know is how they do have that communication and messaging between student or coach. So how the district come out to control those kind of change, those kind of communication? Do we have a kind of policy then we can go through those messages or just
No.
relate to the policy, the sign and the...
That's right. And so the approved social media for school uses, so for example, if you set up a classroom Facebook page, or if you set up a sailing team Facebook page, you have to go through an approval process. The principal, the athletic director, somebody in administration approves that, and there will be requirements that, that can be, one, it can be revoked, two, it can be viewed, and, we should have access to the password to be able to go in, and if you post something, to be able to pull it back. Text messaging between people, we don't. That would be, sort of, if somebody reports something inappropriate, that's how we would do it, but we don't have access to every text that everybody sends to everybody else, so. Mr. Norris.
Oh, Mr. Norris.
So how exactly strict would the policing be, and how exactly would it be carried out on, because I think social media here is like really broadly defined, and I think there's a lot of scopes of, there's a lot of different levels of publicity that different platforms have. For example, you say Instagram, right? I can think of a lot of high school sports teams, including my sailing team, that have their own Instagram accounts, and sometimes they're pretty goofy because it's a high school sports team. They're having fun. But a lot of times they're also private accounts, so not everybody can see them. So I'm just wondering, to what scope is the district going to try and crack down and gain a greater control of these?
So for it to be the official sailing team of the Portland Public Schools, it needs to go through that approval process. It cannot be, it can be private to the members of the team, but it can't be private to the administration. We obviously don't have the resources to sit there and look at every possible, team page or anything along those lines. So it'll be like anything else. It'll be sort of spot checking and, sort of trusting that the responsible people that go through the process of getting approved to have this be the official site of the team. There's nothing that prevents you and your friends on the team from having your own closed group and doing whatever you do, as long as you don't violate another policy around acceptable use, cyberbullying, things along those lines. But, this is the brave new world, and, I don't think that we can expect that any of us will, be able to figure out everything that anybody could ever do around this, the use of the social media. So I think that we're really talking about specifically if a coach or a teacher is going to use this site as the means of communicating about those activities that are school-supported activities, then that will be subject to policing with the limitations around the fact that we have, many teams and not a lot of people with a lot of time on their hands.
And one more thing.
Go ahead, Mr.
How does the district plan to publicize this enact this policy on like existing maybe violations or slight maybe not.
We're not going to rewind back to what people have previously done. We will, from this point forward, after the policy is enacted, ask teams, ask teachers, ask the superintendent to have their accounts approved, formalized, and then, from that point forward is what we would enforce.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Balfons?
Are we just doing questions right now, or comments?
Yeah, I think any questions to clarify? I have do you have one, right?
Well, yeah, I guess I can make it into a question.
We're in workshop, so it's
Sure.
pretty much a
Anything
free-for-all.
goes.
So
There's also some questions on Facebook Live. We have some questions, so I'll get to those in a minute.
Great. Yeah, so one of the concerns I have is the texting between staff and students. And just looking at what we have available for the staff, my understanding is that everybody's using G Suite, Google Suite. And at least looking at my school board account, there's Hangouts. And so perhaps we can make any type of texting type communication between staff and students more official by making staff use the Hangouts app. There might be a way to do that, having a personalized or a staff phone number for each individual staff. They might be able to set it up. Just throwing that out as an idea to look into to make that
I think that
professional.
we basically have accepted the fact that, when I try to get a hold of these guys, I basically text them at their, phone number. So whether you do it from, Google Hangouts or whether you do it from your phone, this is the assumption is that that's the way that, many of our staff communicate with students.
Yeah, I guess my concern is the lack of monitoring. Obviously, there's going to be issues with that, but with Hangouts, we would be able to, I think, monitor better the communication. But anyway, just throwing that out there.
It definitely would be better monitoring. We would still, we're trying to govern even, the fact that people may not use that and then try to establish that that would not be okay. So.
Good. I have a handful of things I want to bring up, unless anyone else has. All right, so before I get to the Facebook Live questions, real quick on the Google Hangouts, one big area that for me is of concern that I think we should maybe look into, when our students and our staff use Google platforms, anything that's not the Google educational piece, Google collects all sorts of information from its users, so we have to be mindful of what we are, what we're entering in, right? The Pandora's box, so to speak, that we're opening up when we start to use that. So just to keep that in mind. One thing that I would like to see on this policy is a restriction of the time of the day where teachers can contact their students. One example would be to keep it from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And that no communication electronically should happen outside of that time. I think that could be, something that we can discuss. I think the enforcement piece is, like you said, is challenging, if not impossible, and it is kind of dependent on complaints or something to be brought up. And then, like you said, we'll deal with it as any other personnel item. Another part that might not be addressed via policy that I think I would like us to look into and see how we can work it out is to start offering some sort of education for our students on how to recognize inappropriate communications, to be able to differentiate what is just goofing around for a sports team and what is truly inappropriate, so that they themselves can know or recognize those red flags when they come up. I think that and I'm probably going to use words that's for some people might be disturbing, but when we're talking about really inappropriate behavior, it doesn't usually start really strongly. It's a kind of grooming process that might start with like a soft little joke, and next thing you know, it truly turns into inappropriate. So again, having the students be able to recognize those soft little red flags, and so if there's a way that we can implement something like that, I think that'd be really important. I'm thinking a lot of Ms. Morioni and the Parent U event that we're going to be having, and we need to have these really difficult discussions, not just with our parents, but with our students. The other thing is, as far as apps that are also available, the Remind app is a resource that a lot of teachers use to communicate not just with their students but with the family. I'm not entirely. I know I've used it. I'm not entirely sure of the details of it or how it works in terms of privacy. I know I talked about Google, but one thing that I like about it is that you have groups, kind of like group chats, and so it's a little bit easier to monitor when I'm communicating with a student. And then there's 15 other sets of eyes that are seeing the same message, as opposed to just being a one-on-one communication. So things like that, I think, help a little bit of transparency as well, and keep it away from that one-on-one communication when we're talking about groups. And I guess, Ms. Victor, you have a question, or do you mind if I read the Facebook Live question? So Facebook Live, the Portland High School Extended Learning Opportunities Facebook page posted a question. I'm going to read it just as is. Hello. I'm also wondering if the approval would be a one-time thing. For example, I would have to just get my Twitter page approved once and then I'm good?
Well, I believe it's annual. I don't recall the specifics. I don't have the policy in front of me, but I do believe that it's annual. Okay.
I think so. I'm assuming that question is being asked because the person that's managing the page could change. So if it's approved once, then I think having an annual approval I think makes sense in case there's a change in that. And then the follow-up question from the Portland High School Extended Learning Opportunities page. I'm also wondering about, quote, approved social media will also not include any information that indicates the physical location of students that is not otherwise publicly available information. Does that mean I couldn't advertise a panel I am having if it is at a school?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Probably not.
I don't think I understand it either. I think they're quoting the policy that says approved social media will also not include any information that indicates a physical locations of students that is not otherwise publicly available information. Schedule and publicize interscholastic sports contests at any given time. So I guess they're asking if you're advertising an event that's going to take place and you're putting the location. That's
fine.
Yeah. And then I think that's all we had on Facebook Live. Ms. Victor had it, and then Mr. Atkinson next.
I just wanted to respond to that,
go ahead.
Last question. Yeah. Perhaps, there is this, for example, scheduled and publicized interscholastic sports contests in that particular, that indicates a physical location thing. So maybe we could clarify other events, other scheduled events or something like that. So it's a little bit more clear that that's broadly any sort of scheduled public event.
That's used as an example, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. Maybe we could just add an additional example to be clear. Thank you.
So let's go Ms. Victor and then Mr. Norris.
This isn't exactly on point with Mr. Rodriguez's point about educating our students about communications, but just to relay that last week I attended a student-led conference for my older daughter at King. She's in 6th grade, and during the conference, she was showing us with a very professional-looking portfolio and presentation, like the superintendent's, some of what she had learned, including some work learning about websites and how to trust information and the sources, and really she in this presentation taught me things about how to really identify whether information is legit, and really getting into sourcing of information. So just wanted to relay that as something that that from my own experience, I was really impressed by in our digital age, the work that our schools are doing to help our students sort through all of the information and understand what can be trusted and what not, and to bring critical learning skills to that information.
Definitely.
Digital citizenship is a soft skill that is an important part of what we strive to teach.
Yeah.
Probably, to Mr. Rodriguez's point, we probably need to do a lot more and a lot better, and but yeah, that is absolutely, I think, exactly what you're asking for.
Yeah. Let me share one little story that happened in my house with my daughter. My daughter's a 5th grader. So a couple of months ago, you probably heard on the news that app TikTok, which is incredibly popular. It used to be called Musical.ly. It was reported that there was a breach in its privacy, that a lot of the users' data was being. And so this was on the news, and it came up in the morning. And then my wife and I are like, oh my God, this is the app that our daughter uses, and she's like, really fond of it. So as soon as she comes downstairs, we're gonna have to tell her that she has to take it off the phone. And so here comes Marley coming down the stairs in the morning, and I'm like, baby, we have to talk about TikTok. And she's like, oh, I already took it off my phone. I got the alert, and I took it on my. So I said, this young girl, she gets it, All right, Mr. Norris, you had a question.
I was also just going to connect to the.
Go get the mic. Sorry.
I was going to connect to something similar to what Ms. Figdor said about how this policy kind of connects to a goal of media literacy and online literacy that I think a lot of what we do research-wise is almost entirely on the computers. It's an incredible tool, but again, I think the policy is important that its use should be limited.
Anyone else? Good. This is, you and I, the superintendent and I have talked about it a couple of times as this has gone through the policy committee. So I've actually really been anxiously waiting for us to have this discussion. This is so relevant. And the moment we pass this policy, there's going to be literally instantly, there's going to be some new app or some new way of interacting. Technology is advancing at a pace that none of us could have ever imagined. Ms. Moriani and I attended a session this weekend at the NSBA conference specifically talking about the speed at which technology is advancing, and just the predictions that were made a couple of years ago of what would be available and the timeline that they were expecting. They had it wrong just 3 years ago. We're again, technology is advancing at a pace that none of us anticipated. So I'm glad that we're at least thinking about these things. So anything else?
Nope.
You can close us up.
Thank you.